Hey everyone, CDM Stage 3 is finally over, and that means it's time to check on our tier list for the final time this season. As always, release tier lists via both Twitter and video form, but it is the latter that matters significantly more. Before we jump into today's tier list as well, I just want to say that the tiers themselves are going to be a little bit blurred. It's kind of difficult at this stage to actually kind of definitively say that there are hard lines between each tier, but we'll talk about that a little bit more as we kind of get into each tier team by team, as it were. All right, let's start immediately talking about S tier then. Not waste any time. Let's throw some teams into S tier, and I'm going to start with Wolves, and we're going to talk about Q9. Now, these teams, for me, I think are the only teams in S tier at the moment. They've been pretty impressive, I think, across the board. You've seen that in their gameplay, statistically speaking as well. One of the things that kind of separates teams is how well they are doing in modes, and Wolves are the number one respawn team, they're the number one hardpoint team, and the number one control team at the moment, and Q9 are the number one S&D team, and so for me that alone kind of separates them out from everybody else. But I want to say they also look pretty impressive. They convincingly managed to beat SBG in their respective matchups versus them and versus OUG, even though the matches were much closer than the matches versus SPG. They managed to take some of OUG's best maps away from them, and that's something that not many teams have actually been able to do this season. When you look at some of those kind of iconic map mode combinations, some of the teams across CDM, like Hacienda Hardpoint, for example, for Godlike, you don't often see those maps going any other way. So for Wolves and Q9 to come out in their matches versus OUG and win the takeoff control, for example, for both of them, or in Wolves' case, the Apocalypse Hardpoint, that is a very impressive thing to do, and I think that puts them currently, for me, in a tier of their own. As for the ordering in this tier right now, I would say that Wolves are just better than Q9 by virtue of the fact that Wolves straight up beat them. So that kind of is what makes sense to me. For me, right now, Wolves the best team in CDM, Q9 really not that far behind them. All right, let's then talk about the teams into Group A, and we start talking about those blurred lines a little bit, because I'm going to throw OUG into Tier A, and I'm also going to throw SPG into Tier A, and this is currently my Tier A, although again, I really don't think there's any real hard line here between S and A in any real way. It just feels like these guys are slightly better right now. Now, talking about OUG first and foremost, as already mentioned, OUG lost to both Wolves and Q9. That's a significant difference to what happened back in Stage 2, where OUG managed to beat both of those teams. And of course, they ended up losing some of their best maps, which I think is a big difference. I think the other thing that might separate these guys as well right now is that when I've talked about OUG in the past, I've always talked about the fact that OUG, when they lose games, more often than not, it's because they play those maps badly. I'm looking back to like their Stage 1 performance versus Godlike, for example, where OUG just played awfully and did things that no pro team should be doing. Whereas I think, you know, you compare their matches versus Wolves and Q9, and while there might be mistakes in the gameplay, they simply got outplayed. Like Wolves and Q9 adapted. You could very clearly see the VOD that they were doing on OUG, and that showed through in the gameplay. So OUG's respawn in Stage 3 isn't quite as impressive as it was during Stage 3, but I do want to give them a little bit of love for their Search and Destroy, because their Search and Destroy has been a big talking point through this season of CDM. It's been something that people have said for a while now needs to be improved, and actually you look towards their Stage 3 performance and it's quite clear that that is going to be the case, right? I mean, they are taking Search and Destroy off of top teams. They took a Search and Destroy off of Wolves, for example, and of course, you know, you look at the losses they take this season. I mean, you look versus, I think it's Q9 and X-Rock, for example, they only really lost those by 2 to 3 rounds in overtime. You know, they only really convincingly lost to SPG in Search and Destroy. And so I think for me right now, I would still have them just top of A tier. I think they've got to earn a place in S tier at playoffs. Just below them is going to be SPG. SPG's Search and Destroy is still incredibly impressive, and the narrative for them hasn't really changed. They lost all of their matches versus Wolves, Q9, and OUG. Their Search and Destroy is phenomenal. They're one of the best S&D teams in CDM, but their respawn's kind of doo-doo. Their control is relatively 50-50, and though it's kind of worth saying, their control is way better than their hardpoint. SPG's hardpoint is the one thing that holds them back right now. They got to improve in that mode, and I think if they do, they could probably easily beat their kind of what I would describe as their nemesis right now in OUG, which of course is a very important matchup for OUG's qualification and SPG's qualification as well for the World Championships. So for me right now, these guys are both an A tier, and I think again there's a blurred line here between A and B where it really feels like you start to mix all of these teams together. Now I go to B tier. I'm going to put 3 teams into B tier. I'm going to put Godlike, I'm going to put X-Rock, and I'm going to put WL. Starting the conversation then with Godlike. Godlike are a very difficult team to gauge at the moment. I think we knew this was going to be the case coming into Stage 3 because the only teams we were going to see Godlike actually play would be challengers teams, and that isn't really a good indication of Godlike's ability, considering we know that they were competitive against Masters teams when they played them back in Stage 2. It's just that they had one too many 3-0s, and also they were playing a really weird map pool. That said, again, it's very difficult to gauge where Godlike are at right now. I feel, looking at the gameplay at least, that Godlike are solid across the board. I think they only lost 2 maps in the entirety of Stage 3, so they did more or less what we expected. It's just hard to say, hey, they're definitively, alongside SPG and OUG right now. But also, I wouldn't be comfortable putting them any lower in B tier. They're perfectly fine. They had a couple of moments in the season where maybe they slipped up per se, but again, convincingly beat pretty much everybody outside of, I think it was a map loss to Seoul and AG, I want to say. So Godlike sitting B right now, sitting pretty, and it's worth saying that we go back to, I think it was Stage 1 or Stage 2, they beat SPG, so they're more than capable of it. And if they do, then we'll put them back up to A tier. All right, X-Rock also sit in B tier right now. I think, honestly, for me, they are actually convincingly below these 4 teams. They pretty much convincingly lost every single series in Masters, and I think the more alarming thing for me is that they barely managed to beat WL, right? They took them down in a Game 5 series, and that's not a good look for a team like X-Rock. So for me, right now, I don't think they're in conversation alongside Wolves, Q9, OUG, and SPG, and even Godlike. I think Godlike would be able to beat them in a head-to-head matchup. I think the third thing in this group, obviously, that kind of the elephant in the room, as it were, is going to be WL. And WL, to me, I kind of considered putting them in C tier. And again, it's that blurred lines things, you could put them in C tier if you want. But I think they earned a spot in B tier because of the fact they were ever so slightly competitive in their matches in Masters. Again, they stole maps off teams such as X-Rock and OUG. They looked phenomenal in Search and Destroy across the entirety of Masters. And they did also managed to force X-Rock, as I said, to Game 5, right? So WL in B tier feels right to me. I think the biggest issue for WL, though, and this is an issue for a lot of teams, is that they feel like they had a limited map pool, and that is kind of what befell them in the end. There's only so many crossfire controls you can play before teams start to realize what you're doing and adapt to it, which is also, by the way, kind of OUG's whole thing about Apocalypse, Hardpoint, and Takeoff Control in, teams are just going to VOD you if you're going to pick it every single time. But still, right now, I feel comfortable with WL in B tier. All right, going down to the C tier, this is going to be the only tier with 1 team in it. It's going to be AG. AG looked pretty good in challenges the entirety of Stage 3. I think the big thing for me is that they convincingly managed to take out everybody I'm going to put below them in the tier list, and so I don't think they belong in a tier with everybody else. But also, I think it's worth saying they're kind of sandwiched between D and B tier because they just don't look anywhere near as good as those teams in B tier. You threw them in the decider matchup and they totally shit the bed. So for me, AG, solid C tier. I think, they're a really good team, just not quite reaching that level of the teams in B tier right now. I talked about D tier then. I'm going to put 3 teams into D tier. I'm going to put Seoul, I'm going to put Diabolos, and I'm going to put Exceed. Starting this with Seoul then. Seoul are kind of unfortunate, and you really do have to feel for Seoul, don't you? Because their entire season has been incredibly inconsistent, and they probably would have had a chance, albeit a really slim one, to qualify had they not pulled out a couple of equalizers at the same time in that all-important Combine Hardpoint versus Exceed and lost that series. And they might even be a tier above because they would have won against both Diabolos and Exceed, but the fact of the matter is they did not do that. And so Seoul currently occupy the D tier for me. Again, though, Bloodlines, they could well sit in C tier if you really wanted them to. I'm excited to see what they do in the World Championships. I think at this point it's pretty much guaranteed that they are going to qualify alongside Godlike. So they've got a bit of time until November to kind of figure things out. Diabolos and Exceed, another couple of teams, very difficult to separate. Obviously, you kind of compare like-to-like performance versus Seoul, and Exceed, technically speaking, pushed Seoul further than Diabolos did because Diabolos got 3-0'd. But, head-to-head, Diabolos actually beat Exceed. So, difficult to actually separate them. Honestly, I think the disappointing thing to think about here is the fact that were Exceed not DQ'd from the World Championships circuit, it would have made for an interesting Stage 4 finals matchup. And alas, Diabolos, of course, for those of you guys who don't know, have already qualified as the Japan representative for the World Championships. And then finally, last but well, okay, maybe they are least, are Accelerate and KZ. Of course, both teams in their respective stages. KZ probably don't even deserve to be here at the moment, but we'll throw them on anyway. Just throw all 13 teams in for the final tier list. Both teams that in their respective stages basically didn't win a single map. As a matter of fact, I'm fairly certain Accelerate didn't win a single map in Stage 3. No, they did not. I just checked it. And of course, you do have to feel for Accelerate slightly, obviously, with everything that happened with the DQ from the World Championships. That affected them adversely coming into Stage 3. You kind of knew that they'd be in a really bad headspace, and that showed out in their gameplay. Ultimately, Accelerate not really able to do anything whatsoever, and so they kind of joined Kingzone into the doo-doo tier, as we'll call it, the not good tier. Really do feel bad for them, and I think they could have been capable of more had they not been DQ'd for the World Championships. So, that's going to be my tier list here. I've gone for a much shorter one this time around. I think things are a little bit more secured. I think, we go back to the first week of CDM, and we were still learning about where a lot of these teams were after weeks and months of practice between Season 9 and the Major itself. And so, I think now over the course of the last 6 weeks, we've gotten to learn and kind of know a lot more about these teams as we've gone on. And so now things just feel a lot more set in stone. I think the things I'm going to be really interested in as we get into the playoffs, I think that's from the 11th to the 14th of September, is going to be, how much of this top level shifts. Can OUG earn a place back into S tier? Can they convincingly beat SPG? Could Godlike or X-Rock do something, of course, as the other teams, qualified? Because, you go back to Season 9 playoffs and Godlike made that phenomenal run to the top 3. So, there's a lot, I think, of things to think about, to consider here with this tier list. But as of right now, this is the final tier list that I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be releasing out of CDM. So, that's going to do it for this video, guys. As I already mentioned, from the 11th to the 14th of September, we're going to be doing the CDM playoffs. We're going to have our watch party for that once again, just like we did for pretty much every single day of action through the 6 weeks of regular season. So I appreciate all of you guys who do tune in with my watch party for that. Of course, on top of that as well, you might have already seen that I am going to be a commentator for Stage 4 of the Call of Duty Mobile World Championships in Europe and North America. Of course, Europe has already just gone by this past weekend, and we've got North America coming up next weekend, I believe it is, not this weekend coming, but the weekend after that, the first weekend of September is what that's going to be. So I'll be commentating that alongside Ton and Proper. You guys don't want to miss that. Make sure you check out the official Call of Duty Mobile esports channel for that. And of course, for all things Call of Duty Mobile, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more Call of Duty Mobile esports content. Catch you in the next video, guys. Appreciate you all. Have a good day.